Okay, guys, I'm going to start. I've started the recording. So just make sure it's running. Yes. Okay. How's everyone doing?
Hi, Doc. How you doing?
Lekker, man, on your side.
Excellent, excellent.
Fantastic. And you, Brad?
Yeah, I can't complain.
Good. Okay, guys. So the question you had about the exam format last time, I spoke to a lady there that's an exam results capture person. And the feedback that she gave me in writing basically comes down to the following, where she says, it's on campus, but students also have the option to do it online. There's a system, they call it DAGA, apparently. I don't know if you guys heard of that. Let me see if I can find the mail. So this DAGA is then so I asked another question. I said, all right, listen, does it mean that it is compulsory to write on campus first of all, or can students choose? And then she said, the exam will be written on DAGA. However, students will have an option to write on campus as well. They merely choose. So it sounds like, guys, this is from the horse's mouth, if I have to answer your question, that you can write on campus, but that you can also use this DAGA system. I asked what is DAGA, because I don't have a clue what it is. I don't know if you guys heard of it. DUGA. She said it's an online system where students write the exams. It's quite confusing at first, but I'm sure training will be provided before the exams start. So does that shed any light on have you guys heard about this DAGA platform? Have you had training on it?
We did receive a email just regarding the I didn't know it was actually called that, but they just were saying that it's a program that basically locks your computer down and basically I think it's monitoring software, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you guys are going to be able to sort that out. And obviously, by the sound of it, did you guys prefer to write online, or were you wanting to write on campus?
Personally, I prefer the online thing, sir, because it just it takes a little bit of the pressure off.
Yeah.
It still requires the same amount of studies. It's just I find it a bit easier because I last studied during COVID, or just after COVID, and we did online exams then, and it was actually a lot easier for me.
That's how it worked. And you, Brad? You also online?
Yeah, I would just say it's just easier because you can be anywhere to do it. Obviously, you'll probably be at your desk, but there's no need to go to a place and waste
Yeah,
time
it's a bit less stressful.
to
Guys,
me
have you
anyway.
seen your marks for assignment 2?
Yes.
Are you kicking yourself for losing 5 marks for referencing style?
Yes, Doc, we are.
And you know why I did that? Because you put initials in where we only use surnames, right?
Yeah.
Yes, Doc, yeah.
Okay. I thought it was nice. I thought the way you integrated theory was nice. The whole thing was good. So a mark about what did we start? 70, 72, 73. I think it's a good mark. I think it sets you up for a good exam as well. By the way, as I've said previously, keep your eyes open, please, your ears open. If you receive anything on exam briefs, let me know. This is session 12, people, of 15 scheduled timetable sessions. Then just another thing, you'll see that I'm sharing the ICE task page on the module page. I believe you can see it. So as we said, the way we look at ICE is if you are in class on a particular day when we deal with it, you get the ICE mark. If you missed a class session, there's an alternative for you to catch up on ICE. So for instance, I've just loaded this evening's task. So here it is, hey? Research conducted on the state of economy. What I do say, however, here is if you don't do it in class, then you have to write me a 500-word essay, a minimum of 3 academic references. So sometimes I make it a bit more difficult or a bit more work to catch up on the mark, but nevertheless, the mark is there. What I was thinking is just to alleviate all or any uncertainty I'm going to send you guys a communication tomorrow where I just indicate very clearly if you are short of ICE marks. I see ICE task 2. It was one where we had submissions from 2 students. I did a test submission, and then you guys both, gents, you both posted. There's a post from Cameron, a post from Brad. So you know the location of this. You know how to work with it. You start your thread under a discussion topic. And I really, really don't want anyone to lose that ICE marks. 10% marks for free. You don't have to work too hard to earn them. So yeah, I've made a note to send you guys comms tomorrow, just to say you short, ICE task 1, 2, 3, or 4. Happy with that arrangement?
Yeah.
Next up.
All right, and then we can start. So who's gonna be the first person? Have you guys heard from Kate? I don't see Kate here.
No, I haven't seen anything on the group.
Nothing, eh? All right. Cameron, are you ready to go?
Doc, are we doing a presentation or are we just discussing?
If you have visuals, you can. If you just discuss, it's also good. Did you make some sort of a presentation?
No, I didn't. I thought it was a class discussion. Apologies.
Yeah, no, I've also got just just information written down. I'm just gonna do a discussion.
Yeah. All right, Cam, fire away.
Okay, Doc, let me try and just get some notes up. So just within my research, I pulled out the main issues being economic. Obviously, we have high inflation, high unemployment rates. Some major challenges also being income inequality, but also adding towards high unemployment rates. So you've got that coupled with your income. So you've got people that are supporting unemployed people that have very large disparities in both their income and ability to find and secure jobs. On the back of that, we also have things like political and monetary instability, where you've got political disagreements, such as the proposed VAT increase, which we've resolved now, but it does set fires to political instability. And we've had also that leads to investor uncertainty and weaknesses in the national currency, which you don't really see it directly affecting you, but you do feel it in your grocery bill, in your imports. I mean, we import a lot of our grocery lines, more on the luxury lines, like all our chocolates, majority from Mondelez are now trying to be moved to imports. We see like Nesquik and such being imported now, which comes with a price. The same with Pringles. We also on the back of that have stuff like bureaucracy, red tape, where you need to be compliant. We see that the changes in the Employment Equity Act that they've been trying to force down onto businesses with more than 50 employees, which that changes the landscape and it sets up more red tape for businesses. So if you want to scale, if you want to have more small enterprises, you need to be compliant. I believe that red tape will actually hinder entrepreneurs and just general business growth.
Talking about the case that the DA is opposing with a lawsuit, hey?
Yes. Hopefully something will change this. I mean, Employment Equity Act is important, but we can't be fined on turnover at the end of the day. I mean,
100%.
I think that would really impact us negatively. Just looping back to the economy, our growth figures for GDP is we've been averaging at about 1.5, which is showing weaker momentum. Our inflation running at about 3.7 a quarter. That's quite high if you look at it in terms of inflation, even globally, where also contributing towards our unemployment rate being at 45.5%. So the major challenges: employment equity, inequality of employment, unemployment, political instability, and red tape. I think those things are really hindrance towards growth, hindrance towards our economy going forward. To combat that, I would say that entrepreneurship and business development is crucial. It's the catalyst for everything going forward, to rectifying unemployment, to rectifying slow GDP, and inequality in income. So you've got things that you can use like entrepreneurship to scale as a solution, to create employment, to create SMEs that can deliver jobs and gross domestic profit as such. You've got that reaching into creating a diverse economy, reaching outside of traditional sectors. It can drive innovation and local problem solving and promote both inclusive growth, empowerment in underserved and underrepresented communities. And to back that up, I think we would need to really develop skills and education, because you can't be pushing entrepreneurship without having the relevant skills behind that for the entrepreneurs, but not only for the entrepreneurs, but for the employees, because you need a skilled base of labor and employees to be able to create successful businesses and growth in those businesses. So that would give us jobs, that would give us innovation. It would also have a social impact where you would have a social entrepreneurship that can address community problems. If you are creating a business, you're creating employment, but you're also creating social impact within the community where you operate. We definitely feel that in the retail space, where you get a lot of sponsorships, where you get involved with schools, you get involved with your local community, the elderly, especially in our community, which are quite underserved, as their pension doesn't always take them to the end of the month. So you have to really try and deliver value to those sectors. So yeah, in conclusion, I think we do face considerable economic challenges, but with strategic investment in the business environment, we can overhaul the business environment with education, with entrepreneurship, and we can really pave the way towards sustainable growth and development. And I think that's it from me, Doc.
All right, I wanna take up one or two points that you discussed. And now, guys, without going into a political ideology discussion or bad-mouthing policies per se, you guys are Gen Zs, right? Am I correct?
Yeah.
So they say Gen Zs are diverse, they welcome change, they value flexibility, authenticity, ethics, important, milestones, and achievement is important. There's an inherent entrepreneurial spirit, I say, in Gen Zs. They expect transparency, they are tech savvy, they are good at rethinking or reinventing per se. I don't know if those attributes ring true to you guys. But where you stand now and the things you're saying, let's talk about the climate where there's a disconnect, it seems, between the expectation or the possibilities and where the authorities are going. Spending time, energy on legislation, on small businesses sort of representing demos and that sort of thing. What do you guys think? How much of a ceiling or how much of a put off would that be? If I say, listen, you've got a brilliant idea, you've got a business to grow, but you are faced with legislation or regulatory issues, would that be a put off to say the environment is strictly not conducive for us to do what we want to do, what we're passionate about? Cam, what do we do with the over-regulated issue in our country? Cam?
Doc, I think it is a very testy subject, because we do have always underlying tones within our landscape in South Africa. But I don't think it's necessarily a discouraging factor for local population, for South Africans. But for international investment, I think it can be a bit scary. But for local investment and for local expansion, I think if you approach it with a sense of okay, there is regulation, we need to comply with regulation. it's not necessarily to circumvent the regulation, but it's to find, I think, your go-between. So if they want to say you need 50 employees, and then you get if you have 50 employees and you don't meet equity standards, you're going to get fined. And maybe you only have 49 employees forever. I think that's a very South African approach to regulation, because I think it's not necessarily skirting it, but it's just finding creative solutions to approaching over-regulation.
I can see it brings a smile to Brad's face as well. I hear what you say. So just a question on terms of people adding value. Bit of devil's advocate, we are producing lots of graduees. Is that what you call them? We are really pushing out people with qualifications. In your experience, guys, and both of you are sort of busy with entrepreneurial stuff and business ventures. Do you find it easy to find people out there? And again, from an entrepreneurial spirit, being a pragmatic person, being a business-minded person, how easy is it to find people who are suitably skilled to add value out there? Again, Cameron, you can give us your views first. Is it easy to find people, or are there lots of people out there that might even be qualified but cannot necessarily add value? Your views on that?
I think that in terms of, I think there is a large population of graduates, like you say. I think there is a large base to draw from technical skills to just general industry knowledge, just from my experience. Adding value in a sense of investment, I haven't necessarily found that, because I, like you say, I do think people are a little bit more hesitant and pragmatic to invest in ventures. So I think a lot of people are more centered around keeping their independence. That's just my experience, in keeping their independence and trying to safeguard their ventures. So I think there is necessarily people that can add value. I haven't capitalized on it personally.
Brad, I want to bring you into the discussion as well. Do you wanna reply on what Cameron said and share some views from your side?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't really worked. So I helped the HR lady try to find people for the company that I'm at now. So I haven't really tried my hardest to find graduates, because obviously we in the manufacturing space. But when we were trying to find, say, for example, a graphic designer, I mean, it's very easy to. I won't say it's easy, but a marketing degree is very accessible, and there's a lot of accredited ones which are perfectly fine. But these guys, when they apply, they've got these qualifications and all these nice marks that they've gotten, and their nice portfolio that they've done for private work, but then they've never done anything publicly, and they've never done anything for a company. So pretty much experience based. So I think the experience part of trying to find a job is always the worst, because once you're a graduate and you're so keen to get into the working world, but then no, you need 3 years experience in your specific field. And I think that deters a lot of the Gen Zs into trying to find a job, and then they try entrepreneurship, and then that falls on the backbone. So I think in terms of graduates finding jobs with their qualification, I don't know. I'm very much it's not what you know, it's who you know type of person. And I think that's a big aspect in the South African workforce.
I hear what you say. I'm looking at another piece here where they say Gen Zs are self-driven, collaborative, diverse-minded. Interesting, hey? And pragmatic in terms of addressing problems. They say the Gen Alpha, we have to brace ourselves for the Gen Alpha that's coming in our midst. Thank you. Brad, you have the floor.
Okay, so yeah, I just made it into an easier format with bullet points and just a brief summary of what I'm talking about. So, my major issues and challenges facing the South African economy. My top one was corruption, and I think we are all educated, yeah, and I think Eskom and Transnet are kind of the more harsh uh, corruption bodies in South Africa. And I think just with that general corruption there, it already has a ripple effect in your investment into the country, so foreign investment. Then it's a big issue is the ripple effect from corruption. Because then once the corruption hits, then you've got your unemployment, you've got your inequality, just general slow economic growth, especially because I mean you've got this one guy that's making 10 million rand off a 12 million rand project. Um, and yeah, it doesn't help South Africa's legibility in the foreign market. Then also just have your obviously key points as inequality and poverty. So I actually watched a YouTube video last night. There's this guy named Timmy who's from Greece or something. The first time he's ever come across my YouTube, but he explored. So it's a European guy, and he explored Alexandra. But he obviously went with like these guys that do tours for tourists and whatnot in Alexandra. And watching that video can really open your eyes as to the level of inequality and poverty in South Africa. I mean, these there's literally nothing that these guys do the whole day. They just drink, they just eat, and they just can't find the work. And that obviously stems from the apartheid time. But you literally see in the video, this guy's in the center of Alexandria, and I promise you, it's about a kilometer and a half, uh, one way, well, four ways, northwest, southeast, and then obviously the one way is the richest square mile in South Africa, which is obviously Sandton. So I think that inequality is it's an immense problem in South Africa. Then just another thing that I can agree with is that my parents are in the education system. My mom's at a government school. My dad started a private school. And the key point that I have here is underperforming education system, which South Africans, of course, I'm pretty sure it's still the same. I don't know if it's gotten lower, but obviously the pass rate in matric was 30%. So if I go into the workforce, I know 30% of what I need to know, which I just don't agree with. I've had plenty conversations with my father about this. And yeah, I think the education system, obviously in the public schools, is a little bit more harsh than the private, but yeah, I just think it's 30% just is not enough. Um, and I've just got some points here to improve the South African economy. So I think addressing the electricity and the energy issues in South Africa, I think that's the biggest problem. So obviously using or increasing investments in renewable energy, especially South Africa has quite a few dams and a lot of solar potential. Like we have solar at the house, at work. We're now putting in solar, and yeah, it's just easier for in regards to the company. It's easier for us to know that we can run our machines at this time and all throughout the day, 24-hour. We can run 24-hour shifts. We can promise a client this date and time that it will arrive. So I think in that case, through the business, if we didn't have that opportunity to have that certainty that we'll get jobs out and we'll get money coming in, yeah, then I think there would be quite a bit of an issue. Then, obviously, better state-owned enterprises, and that's obviously we're talking about Eskom and Transnet. Eskom, obviously, I can just touch base. I think you both know a lot about Eskom, just in terms of their general corruption, um, And yeah, they're low maintenance on their stations, low maintenance on their generators and transformers and whatnot. Then for me, definitely streamlining regulations. Like Doc mentioned, there's obviously a lot of regulations when you're starting a company, and it may stray people away. But Cameron, you made a very good point there that if I employ 50 people, I'm going to get penalized. I might as well just do 49. I might as well just make 2 companies, make them 49, but operate in the same uh, or on the same property. I think South Africans are very, yeah, they're very. I complain about corruption, but stuff like that you just kind of have to do, especially in the tax world in South Africa. I think there's also a lot of strict regulations, and I think I also watched I read an article the other day where a lady was saying that we as South Africans are taxed on 120 or 140 um products or services within our everyday lives. So yeah, obviously your regulations should be uh, less strict on the SMEs in the country. And then can entrepreneurship help? I think entrepreneurship can help everywhere, or in most places, because it obviously creates jobs, drives innovation, promotes development, and it empowers people for the sole reason that I, as a hopeful future business owner, I would like to say that, okay, I've employed these people and I'm in a way putting food on their tables at home. And I know my director, I have a good relationship with him and he's pretty much my mentor. So I'm asking him questions of these tasks and whatnot. And just something that I have here as well is that there's a guy that he's been working with. His name's Liberty. He's a Zimbabwean guy. Uh, he took him in as a gardener back in the day before he had these businesses that he runs now. And it's just nice for him to know that he's supported Liberty. And obviously, it hasn't been the same salary every year. And he gives him increases, gives him birthday presents and gifts and whatnot for Christmas, and his wife and his daughter in Zimbabwe. So I think that's just the socioeconomic aspect that also helps. I mean, because if Liberty didn't have the opportunity to meet my director just on the side of the road one day, he wouldn't have uh, the life that he has now. Obviously, there are other ways. I mean, we wouldn't know what he would done before, and maybe he would be even more successful. But I think he's comfortable and happy where he is now. Um, but yeah, I think just in general, entrepreneurship, it creates jobs, it lessens the unemployment, it can lessen inequality and poverty. And I think entrepreneurship is a huge benefit in the country. But yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you. Some nice points there. I think another thing, where entrepreneurs have a knack for is to identify people and they've got an eye for people with potential. Hey, don't you guys think?
Yeah.
So let's talk about economic inequality specifically. You guys know about the Gini coefficient. It's approaching 0.67 or 0.7 almost. So they say it's it's among the highest in the world. The whole story of economic inequality. And I'd like to hear what you guys say about this. What I think, if we say equality means that each individual or group are given the same opportunities. So let's say there's a race, there's an athletical 100-meter sprint race on. You've got 12 athletes there. They have the same opportunity. They've got access to the same coaching, same equipment, same whatever. And the gunshot goes off and the race starts going. These people had the same opportunity starting. That's equality, whereas equity looks at or speaks to what we can do to reach an equal outcome. In other words, say 10 meters or 5 meters before the finishing line, you would say, all right, everyone stop. Stop, 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 stop. Now, all catch up, be together, and let's cross the finish line simultaneously. We must all equal finish. We must all have an equal outcome, which is completely a different story. Is it sustainable to say that we're aiming for, which is in essence, not economic equality, but maybe more of an equity vibe to it? Let's divide. Theoretically, guys, hypothetically, we've got a scenario where we say we've got a community, closed community, self-sustaining community. There's a village, there's 100 people there. Some of them are working hard, some of them are beggars in the street, some of them are sitting in the bar, some of them are doing this, some of them are doing this. If you could, for instance, divide stuff completely equal, if you could have divide the spoils of that town equally between people, and you then walk out again, what do you guys think will happen if you go back in a month's time? So people have sort of spoke about this as a philosophical discussion to say, if you come back a month later, then the guy that was working hard and successful will be working hard and successful again, and the guy that was lying around lazy in the streets will be lying around lazy in the streets again. Are we perhaps looking, because the inequality, economic inequality discussion is being talked all the time, but aren't we perhaps working at the wrong end of stuff by adjusting totals? It's almost like saying, when people behave in certain ways, there's a lot of focus on modifying behavioral outcomes. And we tell people, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. But what about going to the actual underpinning areas or space where that behavior actually originates from? You hear where I'm going? Isn't that the right place to work? Are we working in the correct place? It's almost like, when you spoke about the 30% figure, and I think I hear more and more people saying, which I agree with, is we're only starting to see the effect of that now. We're really getting the harvest of that policy now. It's irreversible. We can't go back. It's not something we can turn around. Are we applying the correct measures, maybe in terms of short term? I know many years ago when I was doing my MBA, we had a laugh about the inflation basket at some points, because the inflation target was there, and then the inflation target was a bit high, and then they just took something out of the basket, and then they said, well, okay, now the inflation target looks better again. It's almost like there's ways to fix things, and then there's ways to fix things. Just your views on that sort of thing. Is it sustainable to intervene with market forces in a what's the word I'm looking for? In a non-organic, non-natural way, and expect that to be sustainable? Your comments, Cam?
Can Brad go first?
Yeah. No, I can. For me, just in terms of the equality and equity, obviously, Doc, I think you're making a very good point. I mean, I haven't used the word equity in a term of social constructs in years. It's always just been equality. But yeah, obviously the race scenario that you brought up makes a lot of sense, because another as I said, my parents are in education, and what they use to define equality and equity, my dad usually just says that imagine what is it? Imagine every student, so in quality, imagine every student had the exact same textbook. But then you've got the private schools that have the libraries, they have the computers, they have electricity, they have support, they have sports days to bring up morale. But then you've got obviously the poorer areas that don't have the access to that. Yes, they've been given the same equal opportunity in terms of the textbooks, but then the scenario is different. So that's where your unequal or your equal starting points happen, and then your unequal finishing points occur. Then in terms of the equity, I remember my dad also saying that a good example of this is obviously you distribute your resources based on the needs of specific people. So you've obviously got the St. John's, for example, that has the access to the electricity, that have the access to the computers, that have the access to the library. But then you have to, if those guys are getting, if St. John's is the highest performing school in South Africa, if I'm not mistaken, they could be something like that. They've got that because of their resources. And you've got Mamelodi High, which is obviously it's in quite a rough town. It's quite poverty stricken. They don't have any of those resources. But if those resources were given to those kids, they could have I could say they could have an equal opportunity in the starting point and the end point, and throughout the whole process. So I think it was a very good point. I actually really didn't think about it in the socioeconomic way. But yeah, I do think apartheid has affected the many communities today, and it's still going on today. But yeah, I think that's just my 2 cents on equality and equity.
Interesting. Cam, you want to share something?
Yes, yeah. I do think you need to go to grassroots. I don't think you can solve it by just moving the goalpost. Like you say, if you're taking an item out of the inflation basket to make it suit your policy, I don't think you're actually doing a justified work of actually even meeting your own standards. You're just moving the goal at the end of the day. If we don't invest in from grassroots up with education, with just giving the people the right starting block to start off on, we're not gonna end at any end up at any point of equality or correcting unemployment or inequality of income. I just think we're gonna do this keep running in place. We're just gonna keep saying, okay, well, now let's regulate this because we need to try and address the issue further. Let's put in additional regulation. Yeah, it's not going to change anything for the better.
Like what you're saying, so our focus should rather be at grassroots or at equality, the start of the race, than equity. There's something I want to leave with you guys, which made such an impression on me when I read this many years ago, where you guys also sort of made reference to this, like South Africans have a way to circumvent stuff and regulations and just to make things happen. So they say these guys, I mean, it's obviously just a fictional scenario, but there was an opening for a furniture salesman, and so there are lots of people there sitting there lining up, waiting to be interviewed for the position. And while these guys were sitting there and waiting for their turn, one of these people went up, and by the time it was his turn to be interviewed, he had sold, say, 2 or 3 lounge suites. So guess who got the job? There's lots of people making lots of noise. I mean, if you look at people in Parliament, respectfully, they're talking for days and nights about policies and this and that, and it's arguments and it's fighting and it's laughing and it's screaming. But almost, how shall I say it? Below the radar, there's opportunity and there's work to be done. And I think as long as we remain positive, we check our attitudes, we preserve our tranquility, and we look for outcomes. And important, we are not too worried or carrying too much of a burden about stuff that falls outside our control. That's the so-called Stoic philosophy, where they say, don't channel energy, don't waste energy on stuff that falls outside your locus of influence or your locus of control. Rather use that energy and put that into something where you have control on. So there's lots of people that can spiral down and almost to get stuck in the negatives, or things that are not right and so on, and it can really take you down, and it can spiral down. But I mean, you guys can agree with me, when you spend time in the wrong company, it also tends to draw you down. But to say, listen, while people are making noise and fighting about this and that, let's do the work, and let's sell the lounge suites under their noses and under the radar, and make work and make happen whatever we should make happen, eh? That's a healthy philosophy. Guys, anything else you want to ask, add, anything that is uncertain at this point? Any housekeeping issues, any other issues you want to discuss?
So I just wanted to check in, is there an exam scope that's been released, or something that we can just, I know usually they tell us chapters 1 through 9 or such. I just don't want to overstudy, understudy. I just want to make sure we hit all the points, if it is textbook related, or how the exam is physically going to be.
Yeah, so it's definitely not going to be textbook related per se. So your model outline is there. So there's a bit of a chapter outline in your model outline where they loosely look at the chapters. But obviously, like we said right at the start, you guys are expected to work outside and beyond the scope of that.
Yeah.
So I don't think you need to worry about specifically looking at chapters. And then, yeah, let's just keep an eye on for when that, I believe, scene exam brief is published, so that we can look at that. And then I'm going to equip you with some techniques and some tips on how to tackle that exam, and what the expectation would be for that. So we've got those sessions left. Let's hope that they give it to us in time. Exam 23rd of June. And so that we can make a success of it. I don't want any of you to
it's the first time I'm writing an exam that's like this. So we usually write like a textbook related or something with the scope. So a bit nervous towards that.
Yeah, I think we must go through my writing tips again. And remember, the biggest thing here is the postgrad mindset, right? They're never gonna take you back to an undergrad, sort of keep you in a narrow sort of textbook frame of mind. And from my side, from the marking, I'm opening the gate wide to you guys. You can literally say, remember whatever you want, as long as you can motivate what you are saying. In fact, we're not sitting with in humanities. It's not an exact science, guys. We're sitting in social sciences. There's not a lot of rights and wrongs and do's and don'ts. The world is open. The world is changing fast. There's a lot to say. There's a lot of aspects and sides of the coin to most any of these issues. And I mean, that's the story with all. If we talk about topical stuff, we talk about the topical issue of performance appraisal systems. We talk about the topical issue of customer relation management systems. You're going to be looking at studies that highlight benefits and challenges, pros and cons. There's always that. So remember, as a scientist, what we are trying to make of you guys is to inform a topic from all the different angles, and to bring in all those variables, and to put forward a balanced, logical, coherent, well-formulated argument that speaks to the topic. It's difficult to solve the problems. In fact, guys, I mean, the problems we discussed this evening, are they easy to solve? You'll agree with me, they aren't. In fact, one could almost go as far as to say that they don't, almost impossible to solve. The problems are complex. So the latter thing here is, don't ever feel that you must come with such a boom and such a hoo-ha that's going to solve something. In fact, if you do that, you're going to lose a bit of credibility. There's some part of a postgrad scientist that's almost, I want to call it vulnerability. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Rather than saying, listen, I've got all the answers and here's my answers. That won't happen. But putting forward something, putting forward some ideas, some critical thinking, some possibility that we can consider, something that we can help understand something better, something that gives language to a phenomenon or a topic that's under investigation, some form of recommendations or interventions interacting with theory. That's what we're looking for. And we're looking at opening your mind and your brain up to the post-grad mindset. That's the thing. Yes, bring the book in, but that's absolutely not the start all and the end all of things. But we'll chat about more about that
Awesome.
when I see you. And I think me especially, maybe more than other lecturers, I'm very open to open the gate wide for my students when it comes to, you know, how you answer and address stuff. Happy?
Perfect. All
just-
happy.
Sorry, Doc.
Yes.
I just want to ask, there are quizzes on ARC.
Yes.
Do we need to do those quizzes?
We encourage you to do them,
Okay.
but I mean, I'm not going to take them into account
Okay.
for is it under activities?
I think it'll just be a good cramming tool to just hit your last points in. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
Okay.
I see there's all these micro assessments.
Hmm.
Yeah, so they are there. I think we can maybe look at them at some point. But you know, we always sort of say tongue in cheek. If students aren't really graded for something, you're not going to really get them to put too much effort in that. But I mean, by all means, guys, you know what you need. I think I've told you about the toolbox analogy that I always use, and I say, listen, there's tools in a toolbox, and if I've got a toolbox here now, put that in your mind now, and I take out different tools and I show them to you guys. You're mostly going to recognize them, and you'll say, well, that's this or that spanner or this tool. That's one level of skill. The next level of expertise would be, can you use them? The next level of expertise would perhaps be, can you master that? So what I'm saying, where you guys are now, the instrument of your trade is words. You need to become a wordsmith, as it were, right? That's what you got to give me what you need to give me. So language, the vocabulary, the subject vocabulary, you have to almost be a subject matter expert. And that's what we, in essence, sort of look at you as, to give language to, and to unpack and unflesh or flesh out the thing that we give you. We're giving you a scenario. You've got theory to bank on. You have to connect the dots. You have to give us something that we can work with. So I would absolutely say, do whatever you can do to put yourself in the best prepared position to handle what they throw at you. But it's not going to be a textbook, give us the 3 points that describes this, or what are the 7 steps that you need to follow to do this. That's completely undergrad. You guys are you've completely jumped over that fence onto a next level, which I think is wonderful. Postgrad is not everyone's cup of tea, but there's a freedom associated with postgrad, which is wonderful. But then again, in the postgrad space, you cannot write down nonsense. It has to make sense. You have to master a different kind of skill, bringing a lot of things into your thinking, in rationalizing your arguments for whatever problem or scenario we give you.
So will
Does
we
that
be
help you?
referencing? Will we be referencing in the exam?
So normally I tell my students, obviously I'm not going to expect you, if you're sitting on campus and you're writing stuff there with a book and a pen. So I mean, it's been a couple of years since I've done this, and there was COVID and things changed, and they changed from year to year. So in this scenario, you sit on campus, there's a book and a pen put into your hand, you write 1 or 2 or 3 exam books full of text. Nothing stops you from incorporating references there. Jones 2020 said this. You're not going to put a reference list in there because obviously that's not going to make sense.
Yeah.
Now, exams typically on a sit-down campus exam was like a 3-hour story. You come in, you sit there. Obviously, you have the pre-seen questions and you prepare all of them. And then you come and you sit and write on that day, and the clock starts ticking, and you get up and you go and you hand in your exam books. The online exam, how it used to sort of work in the past, was there was a take-home exam, and then online, the link would open, granting you a specific window whereby you can do your thing, and then you have to write it in. So I'm not exactly sure. It might be easier to maybe incorporate references in that scenario. Not necessarily. Let's look at it when we get there. But I mean, compiling a full text, a full reference list with all the things, I think that would be unnecessary. But it's very nice to bring in references just as a matter of bringing it into your discussion. Because I mean, if you have them as pre-seen questions and you can prepare, then it's easy for you to sort of bring in Watson 2020 believes this, but Jones 2025 argues against this. And obviously, we know that those are sourced from credible sources that you encountered in your preparation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, Tom. Thank you very much.
I like to see referencing as and when you can, of any sorts, in all academic work. Obviously, the expectation should not place an unfair sort of burden on you guys, which we won't do. So we're not going to expect you to make a heavy on referencing.
Awesome.
Okay, folks.
Thanks, Tom.
Take care. See you next week.
Keep
Cheers.
well.
Bye.
Bye.